Welcome back to our third panel of our fourth virtual Diverse Ed event. And today's event is thinking specifically about visibility and the support of early career teachers. This panel is all about diverse staff, and I'm delighted to be joined by 5 fantastic speakers. Let me just introduce who we have on this panel. So firstly, we have Aretha Banson. Aretha is a deputy head teacher, and she is the co-founder of Mindful Equity. We have Ben Hobbis, who is a trainee teacher and the founder of Ed Connect. We have Charlotte Ellen Marshall, who's an English Lit and A-level sociology teacher, mentor and writer. We have James Clarke, who is a drama teacher and a PSHE coordinator. And we have Karl Pupe, who is a teacher, speaker and author. And he is representing our partner today, Teacheroo, who are an online teacher community. So welcome everyone to panel 5. You're each going to have your 5 minutes to share your thinking about your topic. So Aretha, over to you as our first speaker.
Thanks, Hannah. I didn't know I was going to be first. You can see the fear coming into my eyes. Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mindful Equity and early careers teaching. Yolandi and I started Mindful Equity, just under a year ago, actually. It's gone really quickly. We started our company with one aim in mind, and that was really to increase the representation and visibility of Black and Asian women in education. That was it. Simple, standard. That is our end point. Both our career journeys had been fraught with barriers and setbacks, and both our career journeys had been hampered by not knowing exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, who to ask, how much it was going to cost us, who could sponsor us. You get the picture. So both our career journeys had been steeped in a system in which the odds were stacked against us. So the higher up you seek to go, the greater the odds. Both our pathways to leadership had been significantly longer, more windy, more bumpy than we would have liked, and certainly and noticeably more so compared to our counterparts. And I think you can guess who those would be. One day we had a cup of Starbucks, and there's lots of other coffee shops you can go to, but we choose Starbucks, it's around the corner, and we had a catch up. For once, we didn't speak about work, we didn't speak about the students, we didn't speak about the curriculum, we didn't speak about homework and homework club and marking and assessment. We actually decided to focus the conversation on us, our journeys, us as people. And when we started talking, we realized that we had been hampered by other issues, and that these issues were perhaps more significant in contributing to our bumpy and winding journey. And these were issues of competition and isolation. So we thought, if this was an issue for us, and if this had been part of our journey, this sense of isolation, then it was something that we needed to address and something that we needed to challenge and change. You see, it's really important to understand that the lived experiences of people of colour or BAME or whatever term you prefer, it's really important, and that's no matter what some reports or research may suggest. Why? Because if you ignore these experiences, if you fail to acknowledge these experiences, the system in which they occur will never change. So we work in a system that creates competition by design. As women, we are pitted against each other. It gets narrow and gets really lonely at the top, and there are very few roles available to us. But the journey for Black and Asian women is more challenging. It's even narrower and even more lonely. So for example, if a school's advertising for an assistant principal or a couple of VPs, only one of us is going to be successful, regardless of our talents or our abilities or our journeys or experience, and regardless of the number of positions available. And this just creates competition. The system incites us to compete. The slimming down of opportunities as we seek to progress our careers incites us to compete. But we need to be bold enough to rise above this in order to empower ourselves and others and change a system that perpetuates this way of thinking. This means we have to be reflective in terms of our own practice and the way that we maintain that system, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. This means we need to work together and find our allies. This means we need to allow ourselves to take a risk and open up and to share those ideas, to have those conversations other than the curriculum, to really have the conversations about ourselves without the fear that some of the things we might say might be used or count against us at a later date. And eventually we may even get to a point where we stop competing and build more collaborative networks that helps us as our careers progress. To really support and empower Black and Asian women in education, there are aspects of responsibility that we also need to address. There is a responsibility on Black and Asian women to reach out to others, to build those networks, to establish those networks, and to support others to move up the ladder. To resist the urge to engage in competition that is created by a system that unfortunately we're part of, but instead engage in supportive networks that disrupt and change that system. We do need to own our own journeys and experiences and be bold enough to make sure that they count. There is also a responsibility on institutions and organisations to reflect on their cultures, to think about how they contribute to the career journeys of Black and Asian women. What are the systemic barriers that exist? How do they disproportionately affect or impact the career journeys of diverse groups? And what can be done to change this? We refer to this as allyship. Allyship is an important aspect of moving the conversation on. Change is most likely to happen when there's a pressure from both directions, and that pressure is coordinated, sustained, realistic, legitimate, and goal-orientated. We must also be mindful that allyship is not a substitute for voices of those who are disadvantaged. There is a real difference between allyship and ethical allyship. Allyship should seek to empower others, not monetize or publicize the ally themselves based on the exploitation of others' lived experiences. As a Black and Asian woman, I do not need others to speak for me. I need others to create a shared space so that I have the opportunity to speak for myself and be heard. For me, empowering others is the most important component of ethical allyship, whether I'm being an ally myself or leaning on one. So the main takeaways for me are empower, encourage, support, and build those networks.
Thank you, Aretha. It seemed ironic I was going to cut you off as you were talking about empowering other people's voices. So I was just waiting for a gap there. Thank you so much. Brilliantly opening the panel and segueing really well into Ben, who's going next, to think about this idea of allyship for early career teachers. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful morning so far. So I'm in the final stage of my teacher training, so I'm got 2 months left after completing nearly 3 years of teacher training. And I wanted to share my journey as an ally, because I didn't come straight into education from education. I came in after working in retail management for 4 years from the age of 18. And because I was very young, very naive, I was a white, able-bodied, straight man, some of the things that I witnessed were truly shocking in that previous career. And because I was young, naive, because those issues didn't directly affect me, I felt like I couldn't say anything, or that I didn't have a role to play in that because it didn't directly affect me. When I came into education, I thought, because, you know, inclusion is a key element of any school, that there wouldn't be issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, I was naive to that as an early career teacher. Part of that was because actually I was quite fortunate that the schools I'd volunteered in up until that point before starting my teacher training were schools that actually really embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of their day-to-day ethos and running of their school, not just as an add-on. That was complemented by fantastic teacher training placements that I've had in schools that really champion diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also weren't ashamed to say that actually our curriculum isn't diverse, and what are we going to do about it, and what could we do about it? And as a trainee teacher, they made me feel that I could contribute towards that development whilst I was there. And also, I'm very fortunate to go to a fantastic university that has a thread of diversity, equity, and inclusion through the whole 3-year degree, not just as a standalone day or a standalone module in 1 year, or actually not covering it at all, like some teacher training providers might not. And finally, as part of that journey of being an ally, was networking and Twitter. I would not have realised that I was actually an ally if it wasn't for networking and for Twitter. And I think there's probably lots of other people who are out there in their early career and beyond their early career that are the same. And to be honest, if it wasn't for the Diverse Ed website, I wouldn't have been able to pass one of my assignments that I did this year about diversity and inclusion, because the amount of wealth of knowledge that's out there is phenomenal. And I think one of the key bits of being an ally is making use of that. And I know that my experience of becoming an ally, that there'll be other people out there who've had a similar experience. And through my own networking, I found that some new teachers aren't aware of the issues that are out there, similarly to me. So I think the first step to becoming an ally is acknowledging an issue, but actually truly trying to understand it. You may not fully understand an issue because of your own characteristics, but actually getting to know that I wasn't aware of the horrendous gender pay gap that there was in education until I'd read the Women Ed book and blogs on websites. And that was actually something when I was looking for my first teaching post that I looked into the employers that I was looking at. What is their gender pay gap? Because if their gender pay gap was really high, I don't want to work there because that's compromising my values around diversity, equity and inclusion. And I think as an early career teacher, you need to be, one, really careful of choosing who your training provider is. Do they really embrace diversity, equity and inclusion? Is it a key element through their training? And similarly, then when you come to the end of that training, what school are you going to work in, or what trust are you going to work for? That was something that when I looked around and secured my first teaching post, I was asking, what work are you doing on diversity? What work are you doing on inclusion? And actually, when they spoke about inclusion, were they just talking about SEND, or were they talking about all elements of inclusion? And I'm really pleased to have secured a role in a school that truly does embrace inclusion, diversity and equity as key elements of their practice. I think then as a provider and as employers, you need to communicate that strategy and communicate what you're doing to attract the very best people, the diverse people and allies. And I think as an ally, to summarise, you need to do what you think is right, but be prepared that sometimes you'll get it wrong. And I was really pleased when Halil talked about earlier about making mistakes in your early career in every element of the word, and that we need to be empowered to make those mistakes, but also then the learning from it. Be prepared to be challenged and be prepared to challenge as an ally. And be prepared that you won't ever fully understand, but you can try to understand and try to the best of your ability. And I think one thing that's come out of this event this morning is the importance of networking, and that through working together, we can all ensure visibility and representation for all. And ultimately, we are stronger together. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for having me.
Ben, I can't believe you're not qualified yet. What an asset you're going to be to any school and to the system. So thank you for really modelling the behaviours we need to see for people stepping into the profession. That leads us on to Charlotte, who's going to talk about fear and the fear we sometimes have in our teacher journeys. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Hannah. It feels really a real privilege to be able to be talking about these things. So thank you for setting this event up. I think it's really valuable. I am going to be talking about fear from a very strange perspective, potentially. And I want to start by saying I'm a born-again Christian. And already that feels very similar to the opening to any addicts meeting where you say, hello, my name is, and introducing this concept of me being naughty or I've done something wrong because I love Jesus. And that's something that as my support network, you're all going to work really hard to help me recover from and help me to be cured. But to be clear, I don't need to be cured and I'm not looking for recovery. But at the beginning of my career, and so I feel where Ben is at the moment because I remember those days very vividly, I attended an equality and diversity event where the gentleman at the front suggested, as a Christian, when you enter the building, you leave God at the door. But immediately I felt troubled by that because being a Christian is who I am. It's my master status. It's my reason for being. It's all of those things and anything else in between. Equally, God's omnipresent. I can't leave him anywhere. I'm not in control of where God can go. So it just didn't seem legitimate. It seemed a bizarre request. And equally, it was at complete odds with what I wanted to model for my students and what tolerance meant to me. I would never expect students to leave who they are at the door. I want them to be themselves. I want them to come into my classroom and feel safe. So the first thought that went through my head was, if this is the policy year here, how long is it going to be before I'm fired? Because God is with us always. His name's Emmanuel, and I was already year one, day one, deviating from standard policy. So I didn't imagine I'd be there very long. Thankfully, even though that thought haunted me in my practice, as if being a new teacher wasn't hard enough, it's been 12 years to the month and I'm still at the same site of employment. Not because I put my life under a bushel, not because I deny Christ, not because I deny who I am, but rather that because I trusted that diversity meant celebrating change, celebrating difference, and Christianity comes under that. Equally, I really believe that showing students who you are gives them the permission to explore who they are. They are at a really inquisitive stage of their life. And of all the people I meet with, they would ask me the most complex, difficult, theological questions during break, not during lesson. They don't get to distract me that quickly or easily, but they would ask the questions. The first point at which they start to notice that things are different is the fact I always start my day listening to worship music. It grounds me. It helps me prepare for the chaos that's about to start. And my colleague starts his day listening to Queen and Rolling Stones. So I feel as though Amazing Grace is not quite so controversial. The second is I don't allow blasphemy in my classroom. They swear and they curse, and I don't like it, and I draw attention to it, but I won't stand for blasphemy, and I explain why I won't stand for blasphemy, because that representation to me is important. They need to understand why this is an issue. AQA say that we do love through the ages in literature, and the Bible has poetry in it. We look at the poetry of the Bible. It's all about showing the learners and living it out rather than saying something and then not backing it up. I try to live out my faith because, like I've said, it's who I am. But at the back of my mind is that reminder of I'm doing something that's maybe controversial. I've not left God at the door. And equally, at any stage, they could report me to managers. They could suggest something, take it out of context. But the niggle's not enough to move away from God. It's not enough to deny being who I am or my authentic self. And I have realised, as odd as it seems to sit and say that I'm a practicing Christian, and that is seemingly countercultural at the present, I wouldn't or couldn't pretend to be anybody else. God calls us to be a witness. He calls us to have reasons for our faith. And it's a calling, much like being a teacher, that you just don't deny. It's who you are and it's what you're going to be. So you have to be true to that. You in a classroom is different to the next person in the next classroom. And I think that's a good thing. My highlight of the last year, if there has to be a highlight of a pandemic year, was when a student approached me and said, do you find it really challenging to teach the beliefs in society module within sociology? To which my reply was a very loud and resounding yes, but Christ's grace, God's grace is sufficient. The student gets it. The students are open-minded because we live out these roles, because we are who we say we are, and they see it from day to day. I hope that the fear will eventually go away, that I'm not going to constantly live under the cloud of thinking I'm going to be fired because I'm not the policy that it was. But I also hope that it encourages other people to be brave and true to themselves as well. So thank you again for having us along.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. Your Twitter's going to be going off the chart, mate. Okay, you're getting loads of comments. And I mean, when Benny and I curate these events, getting people to talk about religion, it's like it's one of those like untalked about things in education, and it's such an important part of our identity, our faith, our spirituality, our religion. So thank you so much for bringing a new element, a new perspective to our event today. Leads us on to James, who's talking about the empowerment of voice. So over to you, James.
Thank you very much. And how awesome is this? So thank you so much for letting me join you. I find it sometimes a little bit difficult to talk on the spot, which might be a surprise for some people. So I thought I'd write something and I would share it with you all today in true drama teacher style. I apologize. So here we go. Year 6, top of the school. It meant only one thing. At long last, I could compete to become projector monitor. The power to sit at the front of the school, plastic sheet in hand, carefully following along to Jubilate, or the Lord's my shepherd, moving the sheet further along the overhead projector. I've made it. It's those moments of our school journey that we remember the most. See, I can't recall what I learned in year 8, aside from the food lesson on French toast, but I do remember the opportunities that I got given to grow. Those chances to be able to show that I'm more than just a body in a room, a number on a league table, or that kid who played Susan Boyle during the school show. See, now I know that as educators, we have a secret power. No, we can't fly or shoot webs from our hands, but what we have is the power to empower. Now, we all know that we sometimes like to overcomplicate, take a simple method and turn it complex. Like a Rubik's Cube, we get sucked into a vortex, but instead, we just need to step back to reflect. Or if we don't do that, we play too safe. Need a volunteer for a school tour? We'll make sure it's the same kid who's done it 100 times already before, because we know they'll be mature. They'll turn up in polished shoes, biggest grin, yet that one kid who you're not sure on never gets picked. Always second place. So why on earth would they go to aim for first if we don't give them some power and belief and a chance to feel empowered and, most importantly, achieve? In history, we know a simple action by one person can cause a chain reaction, a spiral from which ideas can change, can grow. Let our classrooms and schools and forums be where history is made and positively changed, a place where every student is given an opportunity to stand centre stage. Students' voice is more than just a student council, sports teams or tour guides. And of course, these foundations are important, but challenge yourself to look beyond the foundations. It's the responsibilities you give in your classroom for a student to be a leader. It's the moments you take a risk and let that student on the verge of exclusion have a chance to represent. It's using your power to empower. One of my favorite movie quotes is, "Life is like a box of chocolates." And I think what they actually meant to say is, student voice is like a box of chocolates. Nobody wants to open that box and see everything the same. When we get a box of chocolates, we want to see variety, difference, but also potentially something new. Now, of course, you have your stable milk chocolates, which is your student council. And those are usually the ones that go first because we know they are a good and safe option. You can't really get it wrong. But those are not the ones we remember in the end. The ones that stand out are usually the ones we didn't like and also the ones we loved. But to get to that final decision point, we have to finish the box, which is not always easy and can take us time. To know truly the student voice techniques that work for us, we have to offer diversity in our approach because we work with humans, not robots. We can't simply pick one approach and ignore the rest for ease, put up our feet and concede. We must explore what we do well and challenge where we can improve. Reflect on the image we present and think, if our school was this box of chocolates, would we open up and regret what we brought or feast on the variety that we see? Often not just a variety of options, but also consider the platforms. Stick me in the middle of a football field and I'd run, but I'd have no clue on what I actually needed to do, but put a script in my hand and I'll don a wig and wick a costume out of my bag. Are the options for both students and staff to be heard all on one platform? Do you only offer the opportunities that require someone vocal or loud? For me, as a teen, I could talk, but I'd never speak out about equality and diversity because I wasn't ready to accept me. And that opportunity didn't come in my teens. It did come in a secondary school, but I was age 21 and doing my PGCE. As a teacher, I was given the right environment and platform to feel empowered, to speak out and accept me. But now I question, what if that had happened in my teens? What if teachers had created some opportunities and forms in which I could be heard and seen, a chance to feel free to discuss my sexuality, a safe space that I needed age 13 so I could breathe and just be me? My voice was crushed and silenced, not given an opportunity to be freed. What if they'd used their power to empower? And although the question is one I still think about now, the answer is not to contemplate, sit and think. Is to be that change that I needed so desperately. The take-home point of this 5-minute rant is, don't accept that one approach is enough. Open as many boxes of chocolates as you can and sample all the chocolates on offer. Find the ones that work for you and share it with those around you. But never forget, your everyday actions and everyday choices you make in your classroom have the power to empower. Be a superhero. Be an educator. Thank you.
Wow, how do we do a standing ovation on StreamYard? Like, seriously, James, off the chart. I feel quite emotional. And like, there's a lot of English teachers in the room here, so thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. And you're getting lots of requests for, can you publish that? Can you record it? I think it's going to go viral. And I'm very glad that our last speaker is Karl, who is a supremely confident guy, because I think anyone else would be thinking, oh my gosh, how do I follow that? But Karl, I know you're going to be absolutely fine, mate. So over to you.
First of all, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Brilliant. Okay. So, thank you. I'm going to be talking a bit about why diversity matters. And I just want to say a quick story of why diversity matters in education. And it's a boy called Mohammed who's in year 10. This happened 5 years ago in a school I used to work in. So what happened with Mohammed? Mohammed wasn't the best child in the school, but he was lovable and he was reasonable. Okay. And what ended up happening with Mohammed is that he was in a class where they were teaching a book called Of Mice and Men, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And so for those who don't know the book, I'm sure most people do know the book is set in 1930s America, or was it 1920s, during the Great Depression. You've got these two gentlemen that are going from place to place, farm to farm, looking for work and so on and so forth. And there's a character in this book called Crooks, who is an African American. And this was set during the Jim Crow era. So as they were teaching this book, or as the teacher, who was a white woman, was teaching this book, Mohammed started to get very, very uncomfortable because this teacher started to say the N-word quite indiscriminately. So what Mohammed did was he said to the teacher, so there was no warning, they've never read the text before. And what Mohammed said was, he said, "Miss, I don't like that word. Can you please not say that word?" All right. The teacher responded with, It's in the text, so I can say the word. It's part of the text. And she carried on. Now, what she didn't realize was that Mohammed was in a class that was where he was one of 2 ethnic minorities. So every time she said that word, people are looking at him and making him feel very, very, very uncomfortable. So it got to a point where Mohammed said to the teacher again, "Miss, I'm very uncomfortable. Can you not say that word to me, a word, because it's a very offensive word?" And the teacher then said, "Why are you being aggressive, Mohammed? You're interrupting my lesson. You're being aggressive and you're being disruptive." Now, the reason why I know this story was because I was in the English corridor. I was in the English room next door. So Mohammed started to have an argument with his teacher. The teacher started to ramp it up, and we've got something called patrol, which basically, or we had when I was working there, where somebody comes to remove the child. Mohammed started shouting and screaming. I come out of my room thinking, what's going on? He was saying, this is out of order. I can't believe I come to school for this. What on earth is going on? So the deputy head teacher that I worked with saying, can you talk to him? Because otherwise he's going to get himself in serious trouble. I was walking Mohammed and he relayed the story to me, and he said something to me which will haunt me for the rest of my days. He said, "Sir, I come to school to feel safe. I come to school, to learn. Why am I hearing that word? Why do I hear that word in school?" And he said, "Why do they hate us, sir?" It even makes me emotional thinking about it now. Why do they hate us? And I thought, wow. So to cut a long story short, he went to the head teachers. He got an 1.5-hour detention, right? I spoke to the head teacher and explained the circumstances. To cut a long story short, he got overturned. But I thought, how can our young people come to school? He's already been othered, and now this word is being said indiscriminately. I've had arguments with English teachers over the time saying, it's part of the text or whatnot, but you've got to understand, the reason why it hurts is because when I was going to school almost 30 years ago, I was hearing that word as well. So what is happening is you've got generations of young people who are being scarred, and that is why diversity matters. And very lastly, when I went to write my book, these incidents like this inspired me. So I wrote a book called The Action Era Teacher Classroom Management Made Simple, because I felt that we needed to have more diversity. Okay. I remember going to one of my colleagues who was also Black, and he said to me, it's a great idea to write this book, but you're not going to be taken seriously. And I said, why? And he goes, because you're a Black man. You're not going to be taken seriously. And these are the things, me being a stubborn so-and-so, as my mum would say, I said, no, I'm going to do this. The only other writer was a guy called Dr. Tony Sewell, who I'm sure everybody knows who he is right now. He was the only other writer. So I said to myself, I have to do this. That in 2021, there's only 2 Black British male writers in education is an absolute travesty. Our children cannot be what they cannot see. And that is why diversity up and down the whole of the education system is important. There's only 200 Black head teachers in this country out of a possible 21,600 head teachers. That is absolutely an absolute travesty. And this is why things like this need to change. And it has to start from all the way from the top, going all the way to the bottom. That's all I've got to say.
Wow, I need to lie down. Like literally, all 5 of you are such powerful speakers in such different ways. I'm just gonna sit and drink my coffee and listen to Benny now do the Q&A while she unpacks it all. So over to you, Benny.
I'm going to try to unpack it all. I'm honestly blown away. The quality of the content has been absolutely phenomenal, panel. So thank you so much. So if you do have any questions, please do put them into the chat and I'll try to cover them as we go. Generally speaking, the feedback is super positive. I do have a few questions and I'm going to go back to you, Aretha, around this idea of career progression. And for our early career teachers, one of the fears I imagine is, knowing the statistics, knowing the barriers are in place, it is quite a difficult place to start a journey. So what advice would you give to young teachers when they're thinking about career progression and how to position themselves to move up that ladder to perhaps provide more representation at the highest levels of our education system?
Gosh, that's a really, really big question, Benny. Thanks. So I think the most important thing is to know yourself. Because if you don't know yourself, and this comes back to what Charlotte was saying earlier, actually, about really being your authentic self, knowing who you are and standing firm no matter what. And I think Ben has also mentioned that about, you know, making sure that he's in a place where there's a diverse ethos, and really being wedded to that. Because the moment you move away from your true self, the moment you move away from your values and your vision, is the moment it starts to get really tough, because you start to compromise. And that's the compromise of fitting in, means that you lose all of that energy, all of that experience, all of that boldness that you're bringing to that setting, that provision, the education system. And if you lose that, we don't get the change. And I think it's really difficult to stand firm. It's really difficult to be your authentic self. But I think that's one of the few things that I would say for early career teachers. The other thing is find your tribe. Find out who is going to be on your side. Find out who your champions will be, and really, really lean on them. And that's one of the things that I wish I'd done a lot earlier. I'm from a massive family of women, really strong women, I would say. But, you know, I was always taught independent. Do it for yourself, by yourself. And I wish I had not done that. I wish I'd thought about networking a lot earlier. I wish I'd been able to show the imposter syndrome, the gosh, I can't think of the word, the chinks in my armor, shall we say, and not been afraid to do that. Because if I had done that, I would have found my career journey a lot easier, because I've been asking those questions. I'd have been leaning into those allies. I'd have been asking for the advice, and it would have been a much smoother journey. And I think that's one of the things that I would say is try to be authentic, but also try to show yourself as a human. You don't have to be this stoic person, this strong person, this resilient person 24/7.
That is absolutely spot on, and it resonates so much with my own experiences as a school leader, that need to network early. Don't be afraid to say, actually, I'm not used to this space. You know, I have these barriers. I know these barriers exist. Where is my support network? So thank you, Aretha. That's really powerful. And you talked about authentic self, and that leads me to a question for you, Charlotte, about that kind of authenticity. And one of the things, you know, you were talking about religion, and as Hannah said, religion is something that I think we often forget about in these conversations about what it means to be your authentic self when you are religious. I imagine that there'll be early career teachers trying to navigate that space, you know, whether they're Christian, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Hindu. What advice would you give to schools around this? Because I think people feel their faith, and they recognize the need to be faithful. However, I'm not sure schools navigate that space well enough. What advice would you give?
It's interesting because my title was The Fear of Being Fired. And I think the problem with schools or leadership in schools is the fear of raising that question. You're told, don't talk about money, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics. So nobody talks about it. Nobody asks the questions. Nobody raises those issues. So we might have, and it does sometimes feel really tokenistic in that we might have Eid banners, or we might have Easter posters, but the conversation is necessary. So I kind of feel as though it's okay to talk to your colleagues about going to church. It's okay to say to somebody, oh, you're really stressed, I'm going to pray for you about that. You, for yourself, for the person, that's being true to who you are. The encouragement on the other side of that is to see that that's coming from a place of trust, of belief, of, well, love, really, for anybody of any faith, is that it's not set out in such a way that it's toxic. It's supposed to be supportive. So I kind of feel that in leadership there's this fear, whereas in the students, as I said, they ask the questions, they want to know, they're inquisitive, they're curious. It seems to be that schools go, no, don't talk about it, because we're going to upset somebody. And I think actually we have to risk disrupting the system, going back to what Aretha said, in order to make the spaces, in order to move forward, to change what Karl's experience has been, so that we can understand the other perspective. But without dialogue, that just doesn't exist.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that everyone will have this very much at the forefront of their consciousness with some of the events that have happened in, you know, the religious dialogue that's been happening around Batley, for example, you know, and how we navigate that space between respect, you know, diversity, of faith, of belief, and you know, the laws of the land, and it's something that is a tricky space to navigate. But I think there's been such an appreciation of you talking about it here today, and that conversation does need to continue. I have a few more questions. They have started to fly in. Thank you, Hannah, for collecting some of these while I talk. So the one of the questions for you, Karl, was this, going back to this idea of mice and men, and having had this conversation with a lot of people around the teaching of texts. I'm an English teacher. Everybody always comes back to, how do we teach these texts? Okay, because we get it wrong. It's been done wrong for so many years. Should we not teach them? Should we preface them? How do we handle that?
The way I look at, that's a great question. The way I look at things is basically what I call pre-George Floyd and post-George Floyd. All right. Pre-George Floyd, I would have given an answer. Post-George Floyd, I want to give a different type of answer. Yes, I've had this debate online with many English teachers saying, well, it's not only about crooks, it's the representation of women, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, that word is extremely offensive. That word has scarred a lot of people. That should not be on the curriculum. We have got multiple authors that we could be picking from to use texts. That comes from right from the top governmental level. But again, we don't have control over that. If I was going back to that teacher basically, I felt she got it completely wrong because of the whole thing of our unconscious bias came. Rather than trying to understand the young man, Mohammed, and say what's wrong, she went into the trope of, he's being aggressive, he's being disruptive, he needs to just leave the room. And he almost got himself in serious trouble. And that's what disillusions our children. If you are teaching text like that, I think it's communication. It's warning the children. If you have got ethnic minority children in the classroom, you must warn them. And I would ask, do you want me to say the word or not? And I'll ask the class, do you want it heard? And we'll have a discussion. I might even put something in my lesson plan where we talk about the context of the word and talk about that. I think if the children understand the context, then they can kind of make up their own mind. But if you're just doing it, it's like if I went into a work meeting and just started saying the N word or the P word or whatever words, and it's like, whoa, no warning and no context, then it's quite alarming. So that's what I would say, especially if you're an early career teacher, is that, yes, I understand you've been given a curriculum, you've been given something to follow, but don't be frightened to question, especially in these times we live in when they're quite sensitive times. So question and speak to your kids about it or your students.
Absolutely. And certainly, you know, the advice that I've given to people around it, which is that dialogue before you teach text. I mean, you're absolutely right. You don't need to teach it. There are, you know, hundreds of other text choices that you could make about, you know, what fits into your curriculum. It's not a gold standard by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not mandated by the curriculum. So, you know, really thinking about that choice. Thank you, Karl. Okay, so we've got a couple of other questions. A question for you, James. People have really resonated with this idea of teaching children like a box of chocolate. Can you give us examples of how you've, like, you know, dipped into that box of chocolates in your teaching? What does that actually mean in terms of pedagogy? How would it manifest in a classroom?
Yeah, I think, well, to be fair, with the lockdown, there's been a lot of box of chocolates, too many to be fair, but hey ho, good job. It's only top half. It's all right. I think this whole idea, and I think this is really important. So I'm in my third year, I think now of teaching, third year. And I think when I started, and I'm sure Ben, you'll echo this, it's all about, you know, what's your approach, you know, which practitioner are you following, And I know myself, being dyslexic as well, I found it really hard because I felt like I was undermined by everybody else because I couldn't write as well. I don't have a doctorate. I haven't done an MA and different things like that. And naturally I felt that I couldn't be a good teacher and I couldn't get my voice heard because I couldn't speak or write in the same way that all these other academics can. And I think this idea of this box of chocolates is actually, you don't need to narrow yourself. You don't need to pinpoint yourself. And it's taken me a little while to get to that point where I actually go, do you know what? It's okay to question and it's okay to explore different approaches. And it's also okay to say, do you know what? I don't actually know. I like a bit of this and I like a bit of that. If that's what that approach is called, great. I like that. And I think with ways that we've done it is when you first start teaching, I was a little bit scared or unsure in a way of how you go about change and how you do things. And I think the reality is you just do it. And nobody's going to stop you trying something that might benefit others. And I think that's the biggest thing with this box of chocolates is just try it. And don't get me wrong, you will try stuff and it will be that like really dark orange with the chocolate. Oh no. And it won't work. it won't be good, but it's okay. You gave it a go and you know that approach doesn't work for you. But actually, when you get that salted caramel and you've got that gem that works in that room, that's amazing. And it's the same when you're going to change schools. You know, you're going to change schools, and just like chocolate, they're going to vary. And just because one person like that, it might not work somewhere else. So I think don't be afraid to just try different approaches and don't pinpoint yourself down. It's kind of how I would look at it. If that answers that question, hopefully.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about it in a slightly different way. And this is the power of what you're saying. I'm interpreting, you know, I think we're all interpreting your words in different ways. And for me, the idea of kind of that box of chocolates was very much around the kind of different identities that children have and how we can tap into kind of their funds of knowledge, which, you know, is a term that gets used a lot when we think about culture and identity. So, you know, the idea of trying and sampling and learning about, you know, you don't know that you don't like the coffee flavored one until you've tried the coffee flavored one.
Controversial, that then.
So absolutely. So thank you for that. I think that really does help. So we've got Ben, I'm going to come to you on this one. Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. Around ECTs, early career teachers, and, you know, navigating these spaces can be very stressful, alongside learning to teach, alongside all of the things that come with the you know, becoming a teacher. How do we actually prevent early careers teachers from getting disheartened with this whole process, particularly if they have protected characteristics, and leaving? What do you think, from your perspective, works?
I think that some of the things I alluded to in my talk was about, you know, finding the right school, finding the right training provider that really has that commitment to diversity, equity and inclusion through all aspects of its work, whether it's diverse curriculum, diverse representation in books. For example, as a primary school teacher, as a white male, I've committed to actually diversifying my shelf of books, because I realised when I watched Diverse Ed last year, I went to my bookshelf and actually I've got loads of white authors and white main characters and that sort of thing. I think also it's about networking early on, and that was something a lot of people have picked up on. And I remember listening to Hannah talk about on a podcast a while ago about how in other sectors you're encouraged to network very early on, or you're given time to network really early on, and that's something that we don't always do in education. And something else that other people allude to is finding that tribe. So through that networking, once you've found the right training provider, the right school, the right trust, curating that network, building that network, and knowing that that's going to take time and it's not going to be easy to build that network. And you'll probably have people that you'll introduce into your network who probably aren't someone that you do align to. So I think it's all those things really, but I think we've got a wealth of networks out there anyway that you can really engage in, and with lockdown that has encouraged us to do so even more. So hopefully all that added together will then prevent that early dropout because of that.
Absolutely. That, you know, we know that as you know, when we all started teaching, that feeling of utter loneliness and that you get when you start out and you're left in that classroom and everything that happens is your fault, and then you're navigating identity and society, it becomes so difficult. But I think you're absolutely right, networking is so important. Got time for a couple more questions. Aretha, I'm going to come back to you on contexts. So, you know, you talk very eloquently about Black and Asian women and doing the work and you know, making sure that there's progress. You know, some teachers are working in very white contexts, so, you know, with very monocultural populations. And one of the questions I get asked frequently is, what do you do, perhaps if you are a white teacher working in a white school out in the countryside somewhere? How do you raise consciousness for diversity when you're in that situation?
You do exactly the same thing you would do if you were in a city school. You raise it, and you raise it consistently, and you make it form part of your curriculum. Doesn't matter where you live in the UK, we're part of a global citizenship. So therefore, understanding the context in which we live globally is really important, whether that to be due to race, religion, ethnicity, anything, gender. It is about understanding actually the world in which we live in. So it doesn't matter if you're in a suburban school or rural school, it actually doesn't matter. It's about being consistent with your approach, being knowledgeable, being hungry for the knowledge, going out and finding that knowledge and finding those people, whether it's through networks or what have you, that have that information and bringing that information into this school. And you will get a bit of resistance perhaps from colleagues, from parents, from students even, but your job is an educator, so therefore educate.
Absolutely, is the bottom line, isn't it? You know, our job is to teach, and that can't be limited to such a narrow scale. Right, I'm just scanning the questions to see if I've missed any. I had one more question. Karl, I'm going to come back to you on this one. There was a question about children and language, and about how this is kind of related to the point about text and problematic words, where children are using terminology amongst themselves that is considered offensive. How do you handle that as an early careers teacher, as a teacher generally?
What I would say to that is basically, there's a chapter in my book called Respect the Culture. You've got to understand the context that you're in. So when I started learning how to teach, I taught in a place called Whitechapel, which is in part of Tower Hamlets, and it's got a very big South Asian community, mainly from Bangladesh. So when I first come there, they were saying lots and lots of words that I did not understand, slang amongst themselves. So rather than be judgmental, I actually sat and asked them and pulled them to one side. What does this mean? What does that mean? It's not about some hierarchical way of looking at things, saying my language is better than yours or whatnot. It's about understanding context. Because language is a gateway into culture, right? And this is where some of the problems come in. Obviously, if it's insulting or derogatory, racist or whatnot, it gets excluded from the room. But where you can, if you can show them that, okay, you, sir or miss or whoever is appreciating my language, they're going to open up to you. You're going to start building rapport. And it's about empowering them, that they say, sir, miss, whoever gets me. So it's about sitting, understanding the context of why they're speaking that way. And then once you've got that opening, then you can start introducing different words. Instead of saying that word, why don't you say this word? And that's where you can kind of do that dialogue. But if you shut it down, then you're not going to build that rapport with your class. So that's what I would advise.
Absolutely. And that's a powerful way of thinking about it, because again, you know, language can be reclaimed. And if you are within a particular identity, you know, the idea of claiming that word, that's a powerful part of the movement towards liberation as well. So thank you so much for your contributions and your answers to the questions today. I'm going to hand back over to Hannah to finish us off.
Well, yeah, thank you, all of you. Honestly, each panel always impresses me, but I think there's been some very special inputs on this one. And James, we're definitely going to edit your performance poetry there and put that out. You're going to be a viral star by next week, just to warn you. So thank you, all of you, panel 3. Go and enjoy your weekends. Thank you for your time. And we'll be back at 12 o'clock for panel 4, thinking about diverse schools.